meeting and review the cases that are on that agenda. We'll do that, and then we'll come back to the Board of Adjustment once we finish Design Review Board. If that helps, Chair, just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, thank you. So where am I? Yes. Oh, that's better. Okay. Okay, I'll go ahead and call to order the Design Review Board. And I need to do the schedule.
I apologize. It's Board of Adjustment.
Board of Adjustment. And we need a motion to suspend this meeting until after the Design Review Board meeting. And then we'll come back to it at that point. In that case, the chairman, Ledyard, will be able to take over. So can I have a
yeah, I'll move that we suspend the meeting.
A second.
This is Brian.
okay, thank you. We have a motion to suspend and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Okay, the Board of Adjustment meeting is suspended. And we're gonna wait until 7:15 to open the Design Review Board meeting. So we'll give that a few minutes. So you can take a break. Okay, is everybody checked back in?
I'm here.
Okay. We got a quorum? I think so. Okay, we'll go ahead and call to order the Design Review Board meeting for the City of Litchfield Park. And today our first item of business are design plans for a new casita, 492 square foot casita, and a small addition to an existing residence at 910 East Campina Lane. And Jason, do you want to give us the staff report on that?
Certainly, thank you, Chair. Welcome, board members. Jason Sanks, planning consultant for the city. For the public and for the board members and city staff, I'll go ahead and share my screen so that we can more or less toggle through the staff report together, and you can see the imagery as I review the items. So I'll start off with the design plans for 910 North Campina Lane, and I'll share my screen now. So you should be able to see the Word document. And apologies in advance, I just upgraded to Windows 11 and I'm doing my best to learn it. So it looks like it's working so far. So the property here may be vaguely familiar for some people. We've got a little bit of reverb in the background if everybody can mute their mics. Just want to make sure you all can hear me clearly. The home you see in front of you received design review board approval for a full complete remodel and relatively extensive additions back in February 4th of 2021. So it's been just over a year since you've seen it, about 14 months. And so the street view there is the what was presented in the street view now, and then what's proposed is you can see they're going to keep this, and you've already approved all of this elevation here. This is from that meeting. Since that time, the homeowner and the applicant are seeking to do a bit more with the property. They want to add a 492 square foot casita in the rear of the residence that will be completely screened from street view by the newly expanded remodeled residence. And you can see they've made the parapet roof design. They've got some double doors opening up here, and then in your packets you'll see the layout of the 492 square foot casita in the rear yard. Further, there's a small addition that they're doing on the rear of the residence, which would also be screened from public view. And based on the exhibits provided by the applicant, all of the colors, materials, finishes, and architectural types will match that of the soon-to-be completely remodeled residence. So we find that the application's been well prepared. The addition of the casita, as well as the small addition on the home, will add value to the residents and surrounding neighborhood. So we're recommending approval of the application, subject to the following usually standard condition that all colors, materials, and finishes of the casita addition will match those of the approved residential plans for the primary residence. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Jason. Do any board members have any questions for, or actually is the applicant present, would like to add any additional information? Here, is the applicant present? I don't know. Daniel, do you know if the applicant is present?
No, it doesn't appear. I can try giving a call if you would like, Vice Chair or Chair.
I guess we can put this, we can move forward with the next item and then come back to it.
I believe Michael Fernandez with 360 Construction is the applicant, and the owner is Michael Thompson. Okay.
Okay, well, we can move forward with the next item of business if that's all right with everyone.
Okay. Right.
Okay, item B, design plans for a new 400 square foot sunken Ramada in the rear yard of an existing residence at 5302 North Tiller Drive. And Jason, you know, give your review on it. And then likewise, is the applicant present on this one?
I don't think the applicant's present, but I was part of the design. This is Ryan.
Okay, you're an agent or a representative for the owner?
Yeah, I drew it for him.
Okay, that's fine. Jason, do you want to give your
Certainly.
review?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair, board members, and public. Yes, so just to recap, these are design plans for a 400 square foot Ramada in the rear yard of an existing residence that's in Sunset Terrace. The applicant is seeking to add, you can see based on the plans here, there's a lot more than just Ramada, but the portion that's subject to design review would be the vertical aspect of it, which would be the Ramada. They're doing somewhat of a resort-like setup in their backyard where they'll have a pool that's going to have a sunken fire pit. They're going to have a spa, and then they're going to have a sunken bar with a Ramada that appears to have kind of like the swim-up bar type feature. As we understand it, the Ramada has already been kind of through the HOA for preliminary approval. Although we don't require that, we do like to see that the HOA has already given a nod so that we can be more assured that there won't be changes after design review board approval by the HOA. You can see the plan view here. The colors and materials and finishes of the Ramada are specifically designed to match the existing residence. We find that the application will add value to the residents in the surrounding neighborhood, so therefore staff is recommending approval of the application, subject to the following condition, that all colors, materials, and finishes of the Ramada edition will match those of the existing residents, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. Do any board members have any questions for staff or applicant? Hearing none, would someone like to make a motion?
Move to approve the design package at 5302 North Tiller Drive in accordance with staff recommendations, subject to the conditions noted by staff.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. It passes. Okay, thank you. Okay, next up. Sorry, I'm scrolling. Design plans for, I guess before we move into the city center one, is the applicant for the item A here?
Yes, 360 Construction. Mike Fernandez is with us.
Okay, thank you. So, do any board members have any question or any questions for the either staff or the applicant? None. Would someone like to propose a motion? Are you,
Move that we approve the application for the home on Campina based upon staff recommendations.
okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so then we'll move on to item C, design plans for pavers, sidewalks, trellises, water features, and other materials within Litchfield Square. And then Jason, or if you want to introduce the person who's presenting the project.
Certainly, Chair. Just a brief introduction, and of course, we can turn it over to the EPS group team as well, what is in attendance. Just a recap of where we've come, where we're going with Litchfield Square in regards to design review board approvals. You last reviewed signage, hardscape, and lighting within Litchfield Square back on September 2nd, 2021. You've also seen, of course, their bathroom buildings and some other features. Since that time, as stated back then, there would be further plan development, and they've continued forward with that. That's occurred in the Central Park area and other improvements. And so now the city is seeking through PS Group Design Review Board approval for pedestrian pavers, sidewalks. They're also proposing a commemorative paver program, trellises, water features, a splash pad, some stone facing finishes, and other details. The full range of items is included in the multi-page packet, illustrative packet presented by EPS Group. You can see here, of course, this park space has begun to look a little bit familiar as it's evolved and you've seen it before. The plan shows primarily event space on the southern portion of the park space. You'll have some food truck parking on the perimeter of the project, event lawn space primarily here. And then we do have I did note in the report, just a quick point of clarification, the food truck parking area is kind of shown as an illustrative notation. The food trucks at this time are only expected to be for special events, not as a permanent fixture of Litchfield Square. So I noted in there that it may come back in the future as part of the use permit application, but at this time it's not necessary as there's no development downtown yet. But it is possible that it would come back through P&Z and council if deemed necessary by the zoning administrator at that time. As seen in the packet, there's other illustrative elements, including these shade structures and trellises. And with that, I'm just scrolling through it as reference so that it's in the staff report for the public record, but I'd be happy to turn it over to the EPS Group representatives for their full presentation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Sanks. How are you? Good to see you again. Good evening, Chair, board members, and staff members as well. So I'm excited to present the park plans and some of the amenities and materials. We'll go through that. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And I also want to introduce Woody Yu to the DRB hearing as well. Both Woody and myself have been intimately involved with this project with Woody and the city of Litchfield and the Parks, Recreation, Parks, Grounds, and Commission, as well as the city of Litchfield Park. So intimately involved, so we're very excited to present the entire park to you and some of the materials tonight. As you can see, we really think through holistically on the design. We'll go through, I'm not going to go through specifically, but I just want to show you that we, solve for a problem. What is the solution? Providing great outdoor amenity spaces and really a focal point for the city of Litchfield Park and making it a landmark, identifiable, public plazas, amenities, connectivity, and a lot of this stems, as you guys know as well, through the city of Litchfield Park agrarian and agricultural historic nature, the date palms, and then aviation with Luke Air Force Base. So we threaded that through much of the park design, and we have some design principles here. We talked about kind of the focal point being a really great landmark for the city of Litchfield Park. In its context, Mr. Sanks did a great job presenting exactly the location of the park, obviously in the center, and it's kind of the gathering space of the entire Litchfield Square. The overall project, as we talked about, just some of the highlights here, the Palm Plaza, and which is this over here, the Carousel Plaza, here, event space and lawn space, so very big spaces for event spaces and multi-purpose areas, kind of a memorial plaza here, and then the amphitheater here with a stage, which is going to be developed as well. And then the aviation play zone over here, a restroom building, and then a secondary restroom building over there with associated with the amphitheater. And this is kind of an enlargement area. We'll talk about these specifically because this is where we start getting into the materials and water features and kind of the design elements to the park. So we'll go through each one of these. This is an enlargement of the playground enlargement area using kind of that agrarian theme again with the furrows. Here is the agricultural elements threading through. It's kind of the themed area of some of the greens. We're bringing that into the playground surfacing, play structures, shade structures, as well as some of the shade trellis elements that come in from the park entrance. And then really that aviation aspect as well with Luke Air Force Base, really making it fun and festive for children in that too, in this location. Carousel Plaza, we have water features here, so there's a great, and we'll show you some inspiration photos of how this was really put together. But in a sense, this is just a kind of a bubbler water feature that comes into a stream on both sides that goes underneath a bridge on both sides here coming down. So this is kind of a stream element, really nice for individuals coming over from kind of the mixed use retail and maybe a gelato and coming over for lunch, sitting along the stream and outdoor movable tables and chairs in the stream. It's kind of, hearing that sitting right next to it as a nice element. We also thought flanking in this really nice colorful flowering trees. And then we have these water walls, which will be kind of seat walls and an amenity as well to the public and the community. And then this is called a belvedere, Woody's favorite term. I kind of talked him through some of the design elements on this too, but really a belvedere is just an overlook, as many of you as you know, and that overlooks into the park itself with the amphitheater and the stage area. So this is at grade level here at 0, and this is really down at about 4.5 feet in this learning garden here. Everything is very ADA accessible. Coming around here is ADA accessible, and these ramps coming down to the amphitheater area here. These are learning gardens, really nice, maybe they're agricultural in nature or learning aspect for the community to really walk through some of these gardens here. And then we have steps that go down here, but ramps over here for ADA accessibility as well. So these are some of the materials we'll be talking about with the pavers and the Carousel Plaza, this entry focal material that comes in with the bridge and kind of the metals. It's kind of nice that this really is starting to tie in. You guys saw the monuments and last presentation that we did, but we're bringing some of those stone elements and some of the metal, the dark rusted metal into some of these things with the bridge elements here. So you'll see that throughout the material. So this is kind of an enlargement of that. And then real quick on this is the Memorial Plaza with the kind of clock tower here, honoring Paul Litchfield and some of the historic nature. This will be in a future phase here, but the Memorial Plaza will go in with the materials that we're talking about this evening. Rose garden that kind of flanks over here, flowering trees around the Memorial Plaza as an enlargement. This is just a quick kind of section through that, so you can really see the Palm Plaza at the front. There'll be mixed use retail, restaurants, and potentially residential elements here, and everybody coming over into the park is kind of that entry point here with Palm Plaza. As you can see, the Carousel Plaza is here, and that belvedere that looks into education gardens, the amphitheater, seating, and then the entertainment stage over here at the end. Very good focal point, and the dumbbell design between the Palm Plaza and the amphitheater stage area. We won't go through the phase because we're going to build most of this out except for a couple features that we just talked about. So we'll skip that slide. As Mr. Sanks had pointed out, this is the entry monumentation and a focal element through the park is by the roundabout. So this will be the entrance into the park with some of those elements that we talked about in the monuments really starting to thread through with the palms motif, this dark meadow, the stone elements, and then the great colors that City of Litchfield Park have in their logo. We're pulling that out into some of the signage elements here that will be lit at night. Great focal point, again, is the City Center Park and some of the stone elements that we just talked about. This is those trellis features that come into the park after that main monumentation as you come through. These are meant for kind of the pedestrian use, but getting some really great shadow patterns from the palm fronds, giving that historic nod to, you know, the palms in Litchfield Park. The stone elements will be on each side, and there's 5 of those that kind of flank into the park that people can walk underneath and have that shadow as they're walking through. These are some of the inspiration photos. So you can kind of get what we were thinking about with some of the flexible lawn spaces with tents and vendors, sort of that open space element with tents and vendor tents and great, you know, food markets and farmers markets, if you will, food truck events that are on each side of the park as well. Some concerts and venues and just seating in the lawn areas there as well. Some of the other elements that we're talking about, remember the education garden for inspiration, that interactive kind of water element with the bridge and the stream that kind of goes by with boulders. We'll be talking about some of those materials. Clock tower will come in a future element here, but sort of historic, but a nod to more of a contemporary nature with the city center and Litchfield Square. Some of the Palm Plaza, Woody knows that when I'm not gonna let this go, but we're gonna, you know, do a GoFundMe page on trying to get a carousel on the Litchfield Park Plaza, but that's for another discussion and a little bit of humor back to Woody scouting there. And then the aviation themed playground equipment, we talked about that, but that's some of the inspiration as well. I'm going to skip this one because we're going to go to the actual materials, but I want to go back to kind of the overall park plan so you can really see those elements. So we're going to start talking about what goes in the Palm Plaza, some of those paving materials that we talked about before for the city center and the along the roadways, along the buildings of the mixed use. We talked about all of those being in the roundabout. So those get injected into some of these elements of materials in the bridge, the metals that we talked about, the really cool stone that we'll talk about on some of the monumentation gets threaded through on the Belvedere. So you'll be able to see some of that stone there. Decorative paving for Palm Plaza. So I just want you to see those in context as we start talking about materials specifically for each one of these plazas. Woody, I don't know if you can unmute, but I'd like for you to kind of talk about some of these materials that we're proposing for the board members and the chair and staff to look at.
Yes, I can unmute. Thanks, Tom, and
You're
good
welcome.
evening, chair, board members, and staff members. So I will go through the materials that's used in the park. So first image that you see here on the top left corner is the decomposed granite color that we'll use throughout the park in the landscape areas as the ground cover. And then the second image here is just a standard concrete color. So this will be the promenade north of the Palm Plaza and south of the Palm Plaza and the various walkways that kind of thread through the park. There will be the standard concrete, that gray color. And the next, we have a decorative concrete that has the integral color. This will match the decorative concrete colors that we're proposing for the for Litchfield Square for the streetscape walkway areas. And this will be at the Palm Plaza. This will be part of that decorative paving. So it just marks that focal point, that's Palm Plaza, along with that central walkway there that you see in the Palm Plaza.
Yeah.
Yep, right there. So the central walkway kind of acts as the separation between the north and south part of the Palm Plaza. Actually, It's also an access, central access that leads you into the park and into the Carousel Plaza. We're applying a more modern type of linear paver for the that central access, as what Tom's pointing out on the screen there. So the top is the pattern for the pavers, and the bottom three photos you see there are indicating the colors of the pavers. So we're using light gray, charcoal, and tan, just so that there is a visual cue of rusticness and also a contemporary, so to create a balance there. So we're trying to avoid using just gray tones, but adding some tan, some color in there. Going back to this square-ish paver that you see there is the Cityscape Pavers. These are great pavers for that circular type of pattern. So this paver will be used for the two plazas, so the Carousel Plaza and as well as the Memorial Plaza. Again, we're using that grayish color with combined with the tan color. And the next paver you see there is a very rustic flagstone type of paver. So this is going to be applied at the creek water feature. Tom, if you could zoom in there. So it will be along the creek water feature and applied in a irregular shape, kind of mimicking the creek bed. And that will also mark the surrounding areas to the creek. And they'll provide kind of a focal point area for families and visitors to lounge. And we also have bistro tables and chairs there, which I can go over in a little bit. So for the ground covers, pavers, paving, like I said, we're trying to achieve a balance between contemporariness and still giving that nod to the traditional characters. So we're using the gray tones with colors. And then moving on to the vertical elements, we have the brown color concrete cap that's applied at seat walls along with the stone veneer there. And so the stone veneer you also saw on the trellis structure as well as the entry monument on the columns. So we're trying to keep a consistent material palette throughout the park. And the next one is a exterior paint in this color latte. This will be applied to the retaining wall along the belvedere. So we're trying to keep the vertical colors more neutral, and that works well with the veneers and the metal elements that we're proposing in the park.
Just to add to that too, Woody and board members and chair, that will be the back side of it, that color right here. We want to try to minimize the cost of this to the city. However, creating that complementary color, the front side of this over here or facing the amphitheater will be that stone element right here on this side.
Thanks for that, Tom.
You're welcome.
All right, so moving on to the fun accent colors. So these are the Litchfield Park City logo colors that we'll use as an accent at the park monument, as well as one of the splash pads. Our idea is to have the logo as part of the decorative paving there. So kids will be running through and the city logo will be there kind of as the backdrop. All right, so this first image you see here is granite material that will go on the water wall that is at the back of the Carousel Plaza. So there will be kind of grooves that's etched into the granite material so that it creates a kind of a ripple texture in the water as it falls down. So we think that it'll be really, really cool and sleek with the black color, and it will work well with the kind of brown and stone veneer seat wall that's adjacent to the water wall. And then next to that, you have the dark brown powder coat color that will be applied to almost all of the kind of vertical metal elements, including the trellis structure and the entry monument. So we wanted to use this color as part of taking inspiration from the historic characters of Litchfield Park and the Spanish mission style architecture. And introducing kind of a rusticness to the overall park design. Next element there, we have the surface select boulders. So these are boulders that will be placed along the creek water feature. So they will be functioning as a barrier as well as seating areas for families and kids who are enjoying the water feature. And a surface select boulder, we're using this type of boulder to avoid that more utilitarian look that you might associate with a riprap. This is more smoothed out, that's picked from the surface of the desert. So it has a really nice character to them. Next, we have the site furnishings at the park, including the park bench, table and chairs, bistro table and chairs. And then we have the trash receptacle, and we're sticking with that kind of silver, pewter, gray color for these park furnishings so that it kind of just blends into the background. And so we can keep the really nice neutral tone in the park. The last we have there is the tree grate at Palm Plaza. So the palms are set in these tree grates to maximize areas for pedestrian circulation. And the Palm Plaza then can also become a place where vendors can set up, and it becomes a flexible space for events. And we're picking this rustic brown color as well, so a typical color for tree grates.
Thanks, Lydia.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the presentation. Is there anything else you want to add to?
No, we're just excited to present this to you. Like I said, we've been intimately involved with this project for two and a half years, right, Woody? So
Yeah.
it's great to actually present this to you in its holistic form. But it's great to, I mean, we've done this before and presented for the streetscape, but it's kind of nice to get this whole big picture because everything is really tying in together with all these materials and stones and finishes. And now you're really getting the bigger picture of everything. So hopefully that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, sorry, we've kind of approved the bathroom and then some of the monuments and other stuff in bits and pieces. So yeah, it's nice to see it all together. And then you're working with our Parks and Rec. Are they involved with some of these?
Oh yeah. We definitely did early on and did programming with them and materials and some of the finishes and programming and the elements of and the also the plant material as well. So we've been working really closely with Recreation, Parks, Grounds Commission, Woody's team, and maintenance and everyone. So yeah, I'm very intimately involved with the city of Litchfield Park in many capacities.
Great, thank you.
Madam Vice Chair,
Yes.
this is Woody. Just a couple things. I wanted to make clear that where we have the food truck parking shown along the west side there, when there aren't food trucks there, that's angle parking for cars, just like on the other two sides of the park. So that's just shown as a way to convert that angle parking. When we do want to have a food truck event, we can convert that angle parking into parallel parking for the food truck. So that's That's not a permanent food truck parking area. Just want to make that clear.
Yeah, I'm thinking that the other angled in, they could also come if you had like a super event with lots of food trucks or whatever. There's plenty of spaces for that.
On all three sides, correct. Tom, I think the other thing you might want to touch on is the use of the pavers around the periphery of the park on the three sides for the sidewalk.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Woody. Woody, if you want to, let me pull that up. I'll try to get to the thing. Last time we presented that was up against the adjacent to the buildings. Remember with the paving pavers that we talked about and the decorative paving and the walkways we talked about. So we got into a lot of detail in what went around that roundabout, but that also gets threaded through the walkways around the park itself. And then that decorative element that we talked about in great detail over here by the buildings gets threaded through in the focal point of the park that on either side of the Palm Plaza, or in the middle of the Palm Plaza, rather, that goes to the focal point of the bridge and then the Carousel Plaza with different pavers. So that gets threaded through into this material. So I'll try to find that as well as we field some additional questions.
Thank you. Any board members have questions?
I actually have a question, and I don't know if it's appropriate now or not. So if it's not, please redirect me. Any thought to doing commemorative pavers where families can, for a fee, purchase their name to be on the pavers? Something like this is a legacy space, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in town that would love to be part of it.
Yes, Councilmember Claire, we are planning to have a commemorative paver program for the main sidewalk that enters the park. And if Tom or Woody can call up that exhibit pretty quickly, I can explain it better. But the entrance sidewalk will be divided up into sections. And I think it's we're planning to have 4 sections of commemorative pavers separated by regular concrete sidewalk. And the idea of that is that we can go out and sell, I don't know, I think it's something like 500, roughly 500 pavers. We would want them to be all the same size so that it makes it easier to fit into that space. But yes, we do have that plan, and that was actually Sonny Culbroth's idea, and brought it to the working group, and they agreed that that would be a good thing to do. And I had EPS go ahead and draw it up as a plan that we can add to the park.
Perfect. Thank you, Woody.
There we go.
Thanks, Woody.
1, 2, 3 sections. So you can see each section there, kind of the brownish color. And I think each one had 150 pavers in it, so it gives us 450 that we can sell, something like that. This is also a little bit more up-to-date exhibit that shows you where the benches will be located. It shows the trellises in a little bit larger detail. So you can get an idea of what that area is going to look like, and especially with the restroom building that kind of grew over time, larger than what we originally planned.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from board members? Comments or concerns?
I guess I would just make a quick comment that I really like the tree selection that's indicated. It looks like it's going to add a lot of color, and it's a lot of desert adapted things, and so I just really like that. And I guess just one other offhand comment, it sounds like maybe the commemorative paver program could maybe be the fundraiser for the carousel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know,
Board
it's
Member Dudley, I'm right there with you.
when Tom first proposed that idea, I went online to see what used carousels would cost. And after I picked myself up off the floor, I thought, well, maybe the bigger problem is how do you operate it, maintain it, keep the sun from destroying it? So, I mean, it's been a nice idea right from day one, but the practicality of it is pretty tough. Maybe we'll get there someday, but we're still trying to figure out what to put there in the interim.
So I have a quick question then. Since we're calling it Carousel Park, what is the intent of putting underneath that umbrella? Or what is that? Is that going to be a pavilion, or what are we looking at?
Well, one idea I had, and we're looking for lots of ideas on this, but one idea I had was to create a circular pavilion, if you will, that would have on plaques, bronze plaques or whatever it would be, aluminum, whatever, the history of Luke Air Force Base. So as you walk around that little pavilion there on the plaza, you follow the history and first of all, the naming, after Airman Luke. And then as you go around, you learn about its role in the war and various wars, and then also the F-35 program, the F-16 program. Anyway, just an idea, that something that we might be able to do with that.
Thanks. Any other questions, concerns, comments? So,
Actually, I'd just like to say thank you. I think it's a great presentation. I think everything has come together really nicely. And I'm just very excited to see some things happening here, and hopefully we'll be able to start some progress on phase one fairly quickly. So Tom and your team, thank you for a great job putting this together.
Thanks, Board Member Claire. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
You're very
Yeah.
welcome, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to echo those thoughts too. Thank you. Anything else? Does someone want to make a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve. No qualifications.
And I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the submitted plans and materials for the park. Any other comments or any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any nays? I don't hear any, so I only heard 3 ayes, but I can't see everybody.
Aye.
Okay, we have 4 at least. Okay, that'll work. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it, your time.
Okay, and let's see, get back to my agenda. I think the only thing left we have on DRB is approval of the minutes. Someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
A second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Do you want to suspend the current events or just complete the agenda and move on to Board of Adjustment?
Here, I would just suggest that we could move past current events. The only recent current event was Carl's Jr. submitted their construction documents today for Dysart and Camelback, but that's it for design review.
Okay, well, I guess we just
Move on.
do any more board members have anything on current events? Okay, well, I'm gonna adjourn this meeting and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Ledger to take over for the Board of Adjustment.
Thank you, Chair Charnetsky. At this point, we're calling to order the Litchfield Park Board of Adjustment for April 7th, 2002. First order of business is approval of the minutes of the January 6th, 2022 regular meeting minutes. Can I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Motion carries. Minutes are approved. We are now moving on to our regular business, which we have an appeal of a zoning interpretation. This is something that is different than what we normally do. At this point, I will turn it over to staff to present us a report, and then we'll move on.
Chair, to the board, I'll just speak briefly if I may. As this item is an appeal by a property owner of a zoning interpretation, which is an administrative act. As you know from this brief staff report, the acting zoning administrator is also the city manager who has prepared the zoning interpretation. So just to kind of further report, to kind of provide some parameters, the board is being presented with an appeal by the property owner to reverse the administrative act, which is the zoning interpretation regarding recreational vehicle parking on residential lots. And the details of both the interpretation and the appeal are presented to you in your packets. Of course, the city manager, Mr. Matthews, the zoning administrator, will present his position, as well as the property owner will present their position in regards to their appeal. And again, further establishing some parameters, the board is being presented tonight with an opportunity to either one, reverse the interpretation of the zoning administrator, because that's the request of the appeal, or two, you can reverse a portion or all of it, or you can deny the appeal of the property owner and accept the interpretation of the zoning administrator. Further, the board may wish to defer or refer any zoning code interpretation to the city council if it's believed that the matter warrants further attention through prospective initiation of a text amendment if it's found that clarification of language in the code for which the interpretation was issued is warranted. Oftentimes, interpretations of the code are prepared if the code is either silent on a matter or unclear. And with that, I'll, of course, turn it over to Mr. Williams, the zoning administrator. As well, we have the city attorney present and myself to answer any questions that the board or members of the public or the applicant or of the appeal may have.
Okay, Mr. Williams.
Good evening, Chairman Ledyard and Commission members. Bear with me 1 second, please. Can everyone see my presentation? Can, thank you. I would like to thank Jason for the introduction. Again, to point out that tonight is not specifically about the specific RV, but rather about this interpretation of the code. Certainly welcome questions as we go along if there are any. This interpretation regards section 3104, screening of non-principal uses. The main point of this section that is in question is the highlighted section you see there in the middle, where it says, such items shall be completely screened from view of adjacent nearby properties. I'm sorry. Sorry about that, guys. Such items shall be completely screened from view of adjacent nearby properties and the public rights of way and parks by a wall or fence not to exceed 6 feet in height or dense landscaping. Items that are more than 6 feet in height shall be set back a minimum of 2 feet for every feet of height from any side or rear property line. In code, word for word. Sorry for the interruption there, guys. The city attorney and the city staff, we interpret this section above as the following: that the first 6 feet of height of an RV shall be screened by a wall, fence, or dense landscaping. Any RV height above 6 feet shall be set back a minimum of 2 feet for every foot of height from any side or rear property line. What that means, of course, in English, say, for example, that John Doe has a 10-foot high RV. The first 6 feet of the RV are hidden by his fence. However, the remaining 4 feet must be at least 8 feet from any side or rear property line. And of course, the breakdown of that 10 feet, the first 6 feet is hidden by the wall. The remaining 4 feet of height, 4 feet times 2, of course, is 8 feet. So thus 8 feet from the wall. Any questions so far? Okay. It should also be addressed that the height to be fully screened by wall or dense landscaping. Thus, if someone has a 5-foot wall or only 3 foot of dense landscaping, the calculation is done based on the amount the RV exceeds the screen. Twenty-six recreational vehicles are currently located in residential properties partially hidden by 6-foot walls. Again, 26 currently in the city. If the code was to be interpreted that it was measured from the ground versus 6 feet of height, then a 10-foot RV would have to be at least 20 feet from the wall or property line. There are very few residential lots in Litchfield Park that would be large enough to accommodate that interpretation. Thank you for your time and interest. I welcome questions if there are any.
Are there any questions for Mr. Williams before we move to the applicant?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the interpretation that you stated that includes, 2 feet in height above the 6 feet, or anything above 6 feet. Why did you and where? What is the basis for that interpretation?
Because of this section of code here that you see. Can you still see my presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
3104 in the highlighted section. Such items shall be completely screened from view of adjacent nearby properties in the public rights of way and parks by a wall or fence not to exceed 6 feet in height or dense landscaping. Items that are more than 6 feet in height shall be set back a minimum of 2 feet for every foot of height from any side or rear property line. That's why. So the first 6 feet is hidden by the wall, and above that must be hidden from the wall.
Okay, but I guess I don't see anywhere in this line of code that says anything above that 6 feet. So I'm just wondering why you're applying it only to what's above the 6 feet and what the basis for that is.
Because the reason why we look at it that way is that not to exceed 6 feet in height. So items that are more than 6 feet in height shall be set back a minimum. That's why. The question between us and the complainant is if the interpretation is measured from. The city staff and the city attorney feel that it's the first 6 feet, again, hidden by a wall or bush, and above that is set back by the height. Where it's my understanding that the complainant feels that it should be measured from the ground. How if you measure it from the ground, there are very few yards in which part they would fit in. And also, I think if it was council's interpretation that it be completely screened, I would have seen no reason to include the word 6 feet in height or to talk about any height. It would just say completely screened.
Can I inject?
Yes, ma'am, please.
So I'm an old timer, so I've been around this long time, and the intent always was to be completely screened. And the reason it says 6 feet is because that's the limit of most of our side yard walls and backyard walls. It's limited by code, structural code as well. You're not allowed to have more than 6 feet in height for a wall. So that the 6 feet is only to say that you can't build a 10-foot wall. It's not meant to be part of the screening thing. But I know from original intent that RVs were not really welcomed. And if they were going to be there, they were going to have to be completely screened from the street and also from your neighbor. So that's just my point of view from having been here a long time. It's just a way to discourage people from parking really large vehicles and large RVs on their lots, which we originally felt a long time ago that it brings down property values and just kind of makes the neighborhood look junky. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Ms. Sherinsky.
Mhm.
It, of course, is up to the board to interpret it just as you want. You have, of course, city's opinion on this, and you have the city attorney's opinion on this. It could be interpreted to be completely screened. I would say, though, if that's the case, this code should be changed where it says completely screened, period. And remove the 6 feet part, remove the 1 feet of height part. Or furthermore, if the intention is not to have them here at all, let's just say that. Let's just change the code to say not allowed at all. Because I would interpret this again, the first 6 feet to be hidden by a wall or bush, and above that, the height versus distance.
And this might be a good time if I can make a point
Please.
of order, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm John Gaylord, for those of you who haven't met, and I'm the city attorney tonight, filling in for Joe Estes. Because this is, of course, the board is a quasi judicial body, and as we mentioned to start, this is an appeal, which is not what we normally do. So this is a more formal procedure, I think, than some of our discussions. So just to keep in mind, we have a very limited scope here. We are looking at Mr. Williams' interpretation as the zoning administrator. And so because this is sort of quasi judicial, right, we want to make sure that we give each side the opportunity we want the zoning administrator to provide the support for his position, and we want the appellant to be able to give the support for his position as well. So comments, I guess, like the member's comments about her own perspective on the purpose or the original intent of the section, that's totally appropriate as her own perspective, but we have to, if we can, try to distinguish that from the I guess from we've got the facts, and then we've got our own opinions here. And so ultimately you're going to make your decision on what you think is the correct interpretation. And so anyway, I guess I would say let's try to just remember to consider our own opinions in that light. Don't mix them up with the facts that are being presented by one of the two sides. And similarly, Mr. Williams, we're not really here to decide whether or not the code should be changed. Of course, that may be a decision for the council on a future date, and maybe what the board decides today will color that decision when they get to it. But today we're really just here to decide. We're here to hear from Mr. Williams what his interpretation is, to hear from the appellant, what he thinks of that interpretation and why he thinks it's wrong, and then for the board to decide whether you agree or whether you support Mr. Williams's interpretation as a reasonable interpretation, or whether you believe it's an unreasonable interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gaylord.
Mr. Gaylord, and we're absolutely going to give the applicant, if you will, his day, but I think it's important from the applicant's perspective to make sure that as he's making his presentation, that he understands what the city staff recommendation is. So at this point, I think it's appropriate to turn to Mr. Gall, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure about his first name, but Mr. Gall, this would be your time to present any evidence and or argument supporting your position on this.
Yes, good evening. I'm sorry for the slight technical difficulty. This is my very first Zoom meeting in my entire life. I'm an old timer also. And hopefully I will get through this from the technical standpoint. The matter that I brought to the board's attention, and I thank the board for being kind enough to hear my case this evening, and I address it to the board and the chair. The matter that brought this to bear is the fact that the zoning code in Litchfield is very clear on the statement in, if one takes into account the plain meaning of the code. Arizona generally, in application of interpretation in the courts, uses plain meaning, and in my in the written portion of my complaint, I did elaborate on examples of plain meaning, such as, for instance, a speed limit sign, which the interpretation is what a normal, average, educated person who speaks the language believes that the words mean. In this case, the code says that an object greater than 6 feet in height should be set back 2 feet for every foot of height. The word height is used in many places in our city code, and in every one of those places, it's defined as the distance from the ground or grade to the highest point of that object. And in this one case, the city wishes to redefine the word height and interpret the plain meaning to include a arbitrarily designed 6-foot wall or 5-foot landscaping or 3-foot landscaping in order to say that the height is not indeed measured as plain meaning would suggest, but rather the height is measured in reference to something. The code does not reference anything other than the word height. Using the city's interpretation, were a homeowner to be towing this said trailer, which is, shall we say, 10 feet in height, and he comes upon a sign that says low bridge ahead, 8 foot 4 feet, using the city's interpretation, he's fully able to drive under that, and he'll discover that that he did not make it, and the air conditioner on the top of that would easily be wiped off. And the reason is, of course, that the height of that trailer is what it is. It's not in relation to some side object or adjacent object, but rather it is indeed the height of the trailer from the ground. And so I believe that having spoken, I'm also an old timer in Litchfield Park, and having spoken to previous board members and other city council members and stuff about this very piece of code, I believe that it was the original intention that it would be difficult to meet. It was indeed to discourage the parking of recreational vehicles, large vehicles on lots within the park, because it is almost impossible to screen them from adjacent areas completely if indeed they exceed the height of the allowable screening, which as has been pointed out, is only 6 feet of wall at its most. The reason that I wish to have this interpreted in the plain meaning is because I believe that it constitutes an eyesore. And I also believe that we have enforced this code as written in its plain meaning for many, many years in the past, and have therefore discouraged the parking of recreational vehicles. And this has caused our property values not to suffer, but rather to escalate more than all of our surrounding neighborhoods and our surrounding cities and towns. Litchfield is unique and has always been so. And I believe that because of codes specifically like this and their previous enforcement, I don't believe anyone has ever driven through Litchfield considering a house purchase and said, well, the fact that I can't park my RV on the property is a deal breaker. I'm not going to live here. If they have many surrounding areas to choose from. And of course, they can, live in Buckeye or Avondale or Goodyear and the cities that do allow this kind of parking. So I'm asking the board to interpret the code as written in its plain meaning, in the way that it was intended, in my opinion, was intended based on my discussions with people who were around when some of this was conceived and this code was written. And I appreciate the time to make my presentation, and I thank the board for their consideration.
Do any of the board members have any questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Gall, first, thanks for bringing this to our attention. Secondarily, thinking of plain meaning, if we're going in a plain meaning thought, and we clearly, in the first part of that code, it says that RVs are allowed to be parked, and they have the requirements. I don't know if Matthew, if you'd be able to share your screen again and put that code back up. I don't remember specifically, but it did give the ability for RVs to be parked in A, except for temporary parking, for temporary parking of recreational vehicles on residential lots, recreational vehicles, boats, trucks, buses, utility trailers, other non-building landscaping equipment shall be stored only on the side or rear yard. So they are giving, so in plain meaning, to me, that says that they were planning to allow that to happen. So I agree that number one is complex, but do you, in plain reading, do you think that the city intended in Part A to allow those vehicles to be parked in back and side yards?
I do believe that that is the case, that they did wish to allow that in Part A, but with this severe restriction, meaning that if a homeowner wishes to park that above height vehicle on the property, that it would have to be set back so far from the side or rear property line that it would no longer present an eyesore, because as we know, then by angle of perspective, if it's far enough from the wall, it appears visually to be reduced in height.
Understand, and I understand that, but would anybody be remiss to think that a code was written stating that it's okay to do it, and then put a restriction in the next line that makes it completely impossible to do the allowable act in the paragraph above?
There are lots within Litchfield that are large enough to allow compliance with the plain meaning of Section 1.
Very few. And just so you know, from my perspective, I don't like visual RVs. I personally don't. But I'm reading the code here, and to me, the code was written in a way that says these are allowed, and these are the rules to make it allowed. So if they didn't want RVs, it'd have been very easy to just say no RVs, but they didn't. So again, personally, I don't like RVs in the park. I don't like seeing them, but I think the code allows for it based on what I see.
Can I also think also the RV is not just the giant motorized recreational vehicles, but also they meant for boats and stuff like that, which might peek up over a gate or something like that. And I think the other intention was the word dense landscaping. You can have landscaping that's well over 10 feet in height. Trees and hedges and stuff can fully hide a taller RV too.
I have to say that I mean, I disagree, Ron. I think that actually this is exactly how laws are written to accomplish what the city's doing. I mean, they want to allow RVs in cases when it will not impede or inhibit, other neighbors' views. But they want to make sure that it's not, that only that case is met to allow an RV. So it makes sense to me that it would be written that way and interpreted that way. And also, may I make some comments? Is this an appropriate time, Chair?
I think you can make some comments at the moment, as long as we allow the applicant a chance to rebut whatever is said.
Okay. So I guess I just feel like the discussion about plain meaning is actually really not necessary in this case, because I went to the zoning code because I wanted to make sure that I was trying to understand what we're discussing here. And Section 2 is the definitions, and it defines very clearly height. And it says, for the purpose of determining the height limits in all zones set forth in this code and shown on the official zoning map, the datum shall be above grade elevation unless otherwise specified. Datum being the fixed starting point of a scale or operation. So, I mean, we are given very clearly a definition of height in the code. And then I don't see any otherwise specified in the specific RV section that we're looking at. Items more than 6 feet in height shall be set back a minimum of 2 feet for every foot in height from any side or rear view property line. There's no qualification of the definition of height there. So to me, this seems actually very clear. And then, you know, by contrast, you know, I know that we talk a lot about accessory structures, and those setbacks are very consistent actually with the way the city is interpreting the non-principal RV usage in this case. It's just for accessory structures, it says, you know, if it's more than 10 feet in height, it shall be set back from the property line 5 feet plus 1 foot for every foot of height over 10 feet. So it's very clearly delineating like the height over some other thing. And so effectively what the city, I feel the way the city's interpreting the RV code is making an RV similar to an accessory structure in its setback requirements. And I have a huge problem with that because accessory structures are subject to design review board and are designed to fit into the larger architectural context. And so, you know, we have the ability to make sure that they are visually acceptable for all, you know, stakeholders and constituents. Whereas with an RV, we never have that chance. So, I guess basically I just want to say that I think that, you know, RVs probably, they're not accessory structures. And I think that the code is pretty clear. And the other thing that I have an issue with is if they are treated as an accessory structure, you know, the code also very specifically said that accessory structures with kitchens or, you know, cooking facilities is not allowed, and an RV has a cooking facility. And I know that the code is very specifically, in many cases, you know, says no rental of, you know, your accessory dwelling units, and an RV it could be an accessory dwelling unit. People do rent those out on VRBO nowadays. And so I think I just want to be very careful about treating an RV similar to an accessory structure in our interpretation of the code. That's
Okay,
the end of my comment.
are there I have a few comments, but I'm going to wait. Are there any other comments from any of the board members? Well, let me make a quick comment here. The thing is, I looked at item A1, the thing that sort of jumped out at me is actually the first line, which we haven't discussed a lot. Such items shall be completely screened from view of adjacent and nearby properties. If you don't go any further than that, that may or may not have been the intent, but that's what it says. So to my way, just sitting here thinking, it certainly looks to me as something that the city council is going to need to look at, however we rule tonight, because there's the fact that you can, whenever something can be argued both ways, then it seems to me that's an issue. But in any event, let me at this point give the applicant another chance to respond, and then I'll go back to city staff if they have any further comments. So, Mr. Gall, do you have any further comments?
I do not, and I thank you for your time, giving me the time to make the comments that I already have. I appreciate it very much. I think that the rest of what I might say, I very carefully laid out in the paperwork that I submitted to the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gall. At this point in time, would the city administrator and or the city attorney care to make any further comments?
Chairman Ledyard, I would agree. I think if there's question in code, I don't think it would be a bad idea at all to send this to city council for clarification on what exactly their intent was, if that would be the board's pleasure. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I have a quick question of staff. I'm looking at the applicant's what's labeled his detailed explanation of appeal. And on that, it looks like he was arguing about two different things. Decision one was the interpretation we've been talking about. And then decision two seems to be on something totally different issue. Are we dealing with decision two tonight, or are we only dealing with what he's calling decision one? And I'm talking to staff on that.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, Mr. Williams, if I may, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, just decision, what you're calling decision one. that's what's before the board today. We're talking about Mr. Williams' interpretation of this particular code section, and that's the only agendized item for discussion.
Okay, thank you. I have a question then for Mr. Gaylord. In
Yes,
the
sir.
beginning, I believe Mr. Sanks made the comment that the options before the board were to either approve, if you will, the appeal or rule in favor of the appellant, or to rule against the appellant, or there was a third option, which Mr. Sanks mentioned, which was refer this to the city council. Is that a third and separate issue, or does it stand alone? Or I want to make sure procedurally that we're on solid ground here, and that whatever decision we make is appropriate without making it any more confusing. I'm not sure I explained that correctly, but I'm thinking in terms of, is it possible to approve and then send it to city council, or is it possible to deny and then send it to city council? I just need to know whether that is a totally independent option or it relates to a decision that has been made on the other two.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer that question. If I may, sir, it might be helpful to have Mr. Shanks repeat that, because I actually heard that option in a different way. So I want to make sure I understand what it was that he had recommended earlier.
Okay, very well. Mr. Sanks, can you elaborate?
Certainly, Chair. Yeah, certainly, Chair. And my intention in the beginning of the introduction, but prior to the zoning administrator presentation, was to kind of provide some parameters for this request, since it's a bit outside of the typical. So no, really the two options you have are, one, you would move to accept the appeal by Mr. Gall, therefore reversing the administrative act of the zoning administrator in all or in part. You could deny or choose not to accept the appeal and leave intact the zoning administrator's interpretation. Those are the two items. In theory, there'd be a third item if there was any lack of confusion, or if you found insufficient evidence in which the board could make a decision tonight, you could table it for further review. That wasn't presented by me earlier, but it is always an option, but it wasn't specifically presented when I spoke earlier. The other item that I spoke of was separate from one of your prospective motions, and that would be, as part of your discourse this evening, if you found that the code needed further clarification in the future for any purpose, you could always suggest that through council initiation of a text amendment, that they could do some work on the code if you saw fit. We've heard board members speak tonight that it's very clear, and others may think it's not clear. So I apologize for confusion, but really it's to accept or deny the appeal, as I just stated.
Mr. Chairman.
Gaylord, can you comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for giving Mr. Sanks the opportunity to repeat that. I agree 100% with what he just said. And that's why I wanted to get a chance to get clarity on what he said. I don't believe that you have any procedural ability to refer this decision to the city council. I do think that you have to make a decision on this appeal one way or the other. I agree with Mr. Sanks that you do have a third option, to the extent that you have an option tonight to table this, or to reset it for a future meeting if you want more time to deliberate, or if you would like to review additional evidence, you would like the city or the appellant to bring additional facts for you to consider. I think to the extent that that's a third option, that's before you, but I don't believe it's a third option for you to pass this decision to the council. I would agree with Mr. Sanks that outside of your decision here is ultimately tonight or on a future night, either to uphold Mr. Williams' interpretation of the code as a reasonable interpretation, or to rule that it's not a reasonable interpretation and to overturn his interpretation. After you've made that decision, outside of that decision, I agree that you would have the opportunity to recommend to the council that they review this section of the code, or that they consider it further. But that would be after. That would be additional to your consideration of this appeal.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, can I ask another question?
Go ahead, Ron.
David, after thinking of what you said here, line 1, I'm sorry, Matthew, can you put that back up, please? We're still seeing your screen. Line 1, item completely screened. So are we able to say that the RV has to be completely screened with a dense plant, and that way it's in compliance based on what we're reading?
I'm going to refer that to Mr. Gaylord since he's here, because that's a legal question.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suppose, I mean, ultimately, you are the appellate panel here. And so your decision is whether Mr. Williams's interpretation is reasonable or not. If you believe it's not reasonable, you could, if you agreed, provide your own interpretation. So I guess to the extent, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking me. If you're asking whether you're able to provide an additional interpretation, or if you're asking, to the extent that you're asking whether I would agree with that interpretation, I don't believe that's appropriate for me in this setting, because I believe you are the interpreter, and I'm just here to assist.
Understand. I'm just trying to get some clarity because I have a clause that reads multiple things.
I think that's why there's an appeal here. And ultimately, it's going to be up to the board to determine. Mr. Williams has provided his interpretation of this clause, and it's up to the board to determine whether they believe that's a reasonable interpretation or not.
Thank you, Mr. Gaylord.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments from other board members? Okay. Hearing none, I guess we're at a point where someone needs to, I'm sorry, the applicant, would you like to make another comment? I thought you had indicated you had not, but go ahead, I'll let you speak.
Thank you. I did want to speak to this very last point of discussion regarding the line that says completely screened. I believe, again, looking at the code as written, the requirement for complete screening and the requirement for setback are two separate items and are to be considered separately, in my opinion, meaning that the code says that if an item can be completely screened by a wall or dense landscaping, then it meets the code. Earlier, we thought that perhaps landscaping that was higher than the 6 foot, a 10-foot tree or whatever would cause this to become in compliance. It is my belief that that is not true, because the second half of that says, without reference to the first, that items taller than 6 feet must be set back 2 feet for every foot in height. And therefore, I believe those two must both apply.
Right. Any further comments, sir, or any further comments from any of the board members?
And a point of order, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Again, speaking to the sort of quasi-judicial format that we have here, before it's certainly appropriate for the board members to continue to exchange views, express their opinions, maybe discuss the issue. But it would be good, before we move to any sort of decision-making, to close, I'll call it the evidentiary portion of this meeting. And so before we do that, it might be appropriate to give the city a final opportunity if they wanted to, if city staff wanted to provide any additional support or information justifying the interpretation. And after that point, Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that would be for the board to have a discussion, to consult staff if they have a specific question or require assistance, but both sides, the city and the appellant, would then be done providing support or information that they would like to for their position.
Okay, well, let me ask staff then, does the staff have any other comments or any other evidence staff would like to present?
Mr. Chairman, no, sir, I would not. Again, I would like to thank the chair and the board for your time tonight. And also thank you, Mr. Gale, for working with us and going through this process with us, sir.
All right, thank you, sir. I think at this point, the way our agenda is laid out, sometimes there are agendas where you have an initial public hearing or something which gets opened and then closed, and then we go into deliberation. It's not really set up that way now, but I think essentially where we're at now, it's for the board to deliberate. But before we do that, let me ask the board members one last time, does anyone have any questions of either staff or the applicant? And if not, we'll move into discussion by the board. Okay, the applicant, I thought I let you speak once before. Do you have a final further comment?
I do not. I'm satisfied with the proceeding as it's gone so far. And again, thank the board and everyone who's had to put so much time into this in the last year and almost a half. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Now, I think at this point, we need to move this over to board discussion and then, some sort of a motion. Is there anybody on the board that has further comments or things they would like to advocate for or against?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman, and I'm sorry. So if we, is this a time to discuss the effects of this, or are we talking about possibly going into some type of different session here?
Well, no, I think we're at a point now where we've taken all the comments and evidence from the staff and the applicant. So we are now at a point where the board would discuss, and I think that the options are either a motion to grant the appeal, a motion to deny the appeal, or in the alternative, if staff or the board believes they don't have enough information, some sort of a motion to continue this to gather additional information. My concern there would be to make sure exactly what that was that we were asking for, as opposed to a motion up or down being made. But that would be my inclination.
So my question then is as a group discussion, if this is approved, we then have effectively outlawed residential RV parking in Litchfield Park. And we're going to have to, Rachel, I see you shaking your head no, but it effectively will, because a standard RV is going to be about 12 foot high. He's going to have 24 foot off his setback to be able to park. And most lots are not that wide to be able to sit inside the home. So unless it's in a garage, we've effectively made parking in an RV or another vehicle that's listed in the code illegal. And we're going to have to tell everybody that is already in the park they're going to have to move their existing RVs.
I think we have to we have to interpret what the code is written right now. And I believe that was always the intent, to be highly discouraging of anyone parking these huge motorhomes on property. I guess that's for the planning and zoning to rewrite the code to be clear about what's allowed, not allowed, and be fair to everybody. But what's written right now, I think is pretty clear that this appeal should be granted. I don't think that it was interpreted correctly by the staff and zoning enforcement. So, but it's not the end of the world. You guys have the ability to rewrite the zoning code. It's not written in stone. So that I wouldn't say, yeah, this is a forever thing, but you need to rewrite it in clear language so that everyone understands. And I think that it's it'd probably be a majority view that we don't want motorhomes parked on property.
I would think that would be the majority view. I think that in the code, well, we have different interpretations of the code. Let's say that. I think the code is very poorly written. I think it allows for a lot of interpretation where it shouldn't have interpretation, and nuance that it should be very straightforward, and it's not. It's not completely straightforward at all. So, and I know a couple of you disagree with that, but I'm trying to look at the bigger picture and seeing everything that we're doing here. So I'm just trying to bring up the effects of what we're talking about. And then I absolutely, no matter what we decide here today, I think somebody needs to go back and rewrite this code in very plain language so that we don't have this conversation.
Absolutely.
Ron, the reason that I was shaking my head is because I disagree that we are outlawing the RVs. I think we are just interpreting the code, and if the code has not been enforced in the way that we interpret it in the past, it doesn't mean that we're changing the code, right? I mean, so that's my only disagreement. I understand that
fair point.
It may unfortunately affect a number of people potentially, because perhaps the interpretation has been of the city may have been different than what the board may decide. I don't know, but anyway, we're not changing any laws. That was the only reason I shook my head.
No, all good. We're allowed to have different thoughts. It's all good.
Yeah.
The awkward silence.
Yeah.
Chair, sorry to speak up, but I don't know. There seems to be quite a number of people in the room. I'm not sure who all these people are, if this is a public hearing or not. Mr. Gaylord, do we need to address that? I just opened up my Zoom screen and I saw a number of thumbnails that I hadn't seen before. So.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Sanks, for bringing that up. If the board is interested to hear public comment, that would be an appropriate thing to do.
Has anyone requested? The normal policy is that there's usually a request to speak, but are there any people in the audience that are there that are requesting to speak to the board? Okay, I'm not, hopefully you heard me. At one point I was having trouble on my end here can people hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, here's what, unless there's someone that wants to speak, my problem is when I look at what it actually says, it doesn't match what code enforcement has been doing. Code enforcement, in order to make it work, if you will, had to come up with a way to interpret. And the way they're interpreting is not what I see in the ordinance. So I think from our standpoint, we have what we have. And so it makes it difficult when, zoning is one of those things where there are sometimes with things like variances where we're allowed to make a ruling in certain special cases to do something different than what the code says. But even there, it's intended to be a minimal thing. Here we have a system where in order to make this work, staff has had to interpret a procedure or come up with a procedure and kind of blend these things together. And to me, when you look at that first language is completely screened. And there are many, many, many lots in Litchfield Park that would never be able to have a motorhome of that size. And there are some out on very large estate size lots that could. So I think it depends on what lot we're talking about. But I think at this point, we've heard all the pros and cons, and it sounds like we have to make a motion up or down. And then depending on how we depending on what that motion is, I guess depends on what happens going forward. So at this point, if someone, I would entertain a motion from someone that the appeal either be approved or denied.
I'll make a motion that the appeal be approved and we rescind the interpretation of the city.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second to approve the appeal and forward the findings on to the city. Is there any further discussion? At this point, all those in favor of granting the appeal, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I heard 3 ayes, and now are there any nays?
Nay.
I heard three ayes and 1 nay. So the appeal has been approved. Thank you all very much. And at this time, the only thing left on our calendar then is adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
And we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.